Hi, I'm Michelle Shields, your course facilitator for our Relational Leadership course offered by the University of Waikato Executive Education. In this video, we talk more about the self and shared leadership and emerging leadership and identity formation of the team. As noticed in our previous video, for centuries people have been trying to define what leadership is. And we talked in the first video about whether a leader is effective really depends on the context and what the people who are in that group value. In this video, we talk more about what self and leadership has to say about relational leadership overall. And we focus specifically on the team's social identity and how it drives the role of the leader and whether they're perceived as effective. And then finally, how the team's social identity is formed. I'd first like to start with a quick review of some of the things we talked about in our last video. First is a call for self and shared leadership. As we discussed before, in some ways we really haven't come that far from the early 90s when people were saying that it was the end of an era for managers. How is it that we can idealize about a leader who reflects a relational leadership approach, yet what we consider on a daily basis in our organizations could be so different? Part of this has to do with the heroic myths we have about leaders. A top-heavy organization where leadership sits at the top is a holdover from the Industrial Revolution with its focus on the management of people as machines. With this top-down command and control leadership approach, the manager is perceived as being all-knowing, and subordinates are expected to follow blindly and comply. Even with the developments in the 70s and 80s of transactional leadership, that is, I'll deliver in exchange for a good salary, or transformational leadership, bring your heart and your mind with you, we still tend to see inspiration and decision-making as things that we think are done by the leader who possesses positional power. But as we said in our last video, leadership in the 21st century has had to face top-down and bottom-up pressures, such as cost reductions that require empowerment, and changing demographics and expectations. People today want more relevance from their work. When we come together as a group, we'll talk more about the types of teams that we may be in and how self and shared leadership relates to each. Next, let's look at social identity in the team. Why do heroic models of leadership endure? In your readings, we look at this issue more in depth. But in general, we have a basic prejudice about leadership, and that's that some people just have the right stuff. Why is it that leaders are often people who are technical experts in their role first? In our course, we'll talk more about how we perceive the leader as having expertise. When we talk about the 3 R's of identity relationship, we're talking about reflecting. The team leader or the group leader's role is initially to reflect the needs of what the group values. To do that, you may meet with each team member and ask what is important to them, what their pain points are, and if resources weren't an issue, what they would do differently. The second R of identity leadership is representing. In relational leadership, it's the job of the leader to represent the needs of the team and the delivery of what the team needs to management. The third step in identity leadership is realizing. For the leader to deliver on what the team requires and what the organization needs and values. I'd like to finish this topic on social identity by talking briefly about the politics of leadership. In your readings, Riker and Platow talk about the prejudice of leadership having three aspects. First is what we've talked about already, the heroic myth, that leadership is for leaders at the top to do, and that we overestimate the impact that the leader actually has on performance. This idea persists because it serves the leaders and followers well, perhaps. We can think about leadership in context of three political systems. Effective leadership and good leaders are not the same thing. Some leaders rule with a stick. We might say that they're dictatorial, or they rule with hearts and minds and are more democratic, with a hierarchy that may be at varying levels of leadership involved. In our course, we'll talk about different levels of decision-making, depending on the type of leader and the political goals that the leader may have. So how does the social identity process occur? Well, first, the relational leader needs to champion the interests of the group. The leader needs to be able to influence by shaping the group's identity. They need to make the identity created real in order to influence, for their influence to continue. And the leader has to be a representative of what the group wants to lead. In our class meeting, we'll talk more about what these concepts mean in real terms and whether, in our experience, this social identity process occurs as it is proposed to happen. That concludes our second video clip in looking at the relational leadership model and the role that the leader plays in representing the needs, the values, and the urgency of issues for the team.